Wyoming Territory. August 1879. Dust rolled across the dry plain as Damon Whitlow drew his horse to a halt at the edge of the abandoned cattle yard. The sun hung low in the west, heavy and red, painting long shadows across the cracked ground. He had not planned to stop. He was headed toward Sweetwater to trade out a wagon wheel and maybe sleep in a real bed for once. But what he saw made his chest go tight and strange. There, chained to a rough wooden fence beside a half-collapsed lean-to, was a woman. Her wrists were bound with rusted iron cuffs, her skirts torn at the hem, her hair wild and tangled. And next to her, nestled in the crook of her bent knees, was a baby goat white, trembling and chewing on a scrap of burlap. Damon swung down from his horse so fast the saddle creaked. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes locked on his, green and fierce even under the grime. She did not look away. "Are you hurt?" Damon asked, voice low, steady. "No," she said, chin lifting despite the chain. "But I will be if you leave me here." He stepped closer, boots crunching dry grass. "Who did this?" "3 men. Said they were going to trade me for a few barrels of whiskey, left me with the goat, thought it was funny." Damon's jaw tightened. He looked at the baby goat, then back at the woman. "What's your name?" "Nella Hartley," she said. "I am from up near Casper. My wagon threw a wheel 2 days ago. They stopped to help, then they changed their mind." Damon's eyes swept the fence post, then the iron cuffs. "You got anyone looking for you?" "No," she said, quiet now. "No one left." He stepped back, paced once, then looked her straight in the eye. "If I take you both, you gonna fight me?" She blinked. "What?" I said. He nodded toward the goat, which bleated like it understood. "I will take both if you let me." For a second she looked like she might cry, but she did not. She nodded once. Damon pulled a small chisel from his saddlebag, wedged it under the chain's bolt, and hammered it free with the butt of his revolver. When the last link snapped, Nella slumped forward, catching herself on the fence post. Her hands were raw where the cuffs had rubbed. "Easy," he said, catching her elbow. She looked up at him, close now, her face streaked but proud. "Thank you." "I do not leave people behind," he said. They rode double on his horse, with the goat tied in a flour sack slung across the saddle horn. Damon felt the weight of Nella's body against his back and the way she held herself stiff, like she did not want to lean too hard. By sundown, they reached a small abandoned line shack near the river. Damon had used it before 4 walls, a stove, and a cot. He set her down there, laid out his blanket for her, and gave her the last of his jerky and bread. She ate in silence, watching him with careful eyes. "You always pick up strangers?" she asked. "Only the ones chained to fences," he said. That got a breath of laughter out of her. Short but real. Damon felt it land somewhere deep in his chest. The goat curled up near the stove, belly full of creek water and bits of grass. Damon tossed a log on the fire and sat across from Nella, his hat in his hands. "You got family?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore, me neither," she said. "It was just my father and me. He passed last spring." Damon nodded. "How old are you?" 22. He met her gaze. "I am 29. She nodded once, like she was weighing something. "What happens now?" Damon leaned back. "I am headed to Sweetwater. I got a small place there. Some land, 1 mule, and too many tools. You can come if you want." She studied him, her face unreadable in the firelight. "Why?" he shrugged. "Because you need somewhere to go, and I would not mind the company." She looked over at the goat, asleep and twitching in a dream. Then she looked back at him. "You meant it when you said you would take both." "I do not say things I do not mean." Nella nodded once. "All right." The silence stretched, but it was not heavy. She lay down on the blanket without another word. Damon stayed up a while longer, watching the fire and listening to her breathing even out. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this. He had not just saved her. Something in him had shifted too. And in the quiet of the shack, with the fire crackling low and a baby goat snoring softly, Damon Whitlow made a quiet promise to himself he would never let her be chained again. Morning came slow and gold. The shack's single window let in a thin bar of sunlight that moved across the floor like a sundial. Damon had already been up when Nella opened her eyes, crouched near the stove with a tin cup of boiled creek water in his hand. He handed it to her without a word. She sat up, stiff from sleeping on the floorboards, her hair shadowing one cheek. "How far to Sweetwater?" "Day and a half if we ride steady," he said, standing to pour the last of the oats into a small cloth sack. "2 if the goat gets stubborn." Nella looked toward the animal still asleep, legs splayed like it had never known hardship. "The thing doesn't act like it was abandoned," she said. "Some creatures forgive easier than others," Damon said, tying the sack. She worked her fingers gently, testing the skin around her wrists. The old bruises were already turning that strange yellow-brown. "You got a name for him yet?" "Haven't thought on it." "I was thinking maybe Hobble. Seems fitting." Damon gave a short nod. "Hobble it is." They left the shack before the sun cleared the trees, Damon walking beside the horse until the land flattened out again. Nella rode with the goat on her lap, her posture straight, her eyes alive in the way folks look when they know something bad is behind them but haven't figured out what's ahead. She didn't talk unless she had something to say, and Damon liked that about her. By the time they stopped to water the horse at a shallow stream, the sky had turned the pale blue of late summer. Damon knelt to check the hoof he'd been worrying since yesterday, careful with his hands. Nella watched him a while, then said, "You fix things like that often?" He didn't look up. "I do what needs doing." "What else do you do?" He set the hoof down and rose slowly. "Carpentry, mostly, some fencing. I run freight in the off months if the trail's dry." "Any of it bring you joy?" He blinked once, then looked at her full. "I never gave that much thought." "Maybe you should," she said, brushing dirt off her skirts. They moved on. By sundown, they'd reached a narrow bend in the trail where cottonwoods leaned in close and the river ran deeper. Damon tethered the horse to a cedar post someone had sunk long ago, and Nella gathered dry twigs without needing to be asked. She built the fire while Damon checked the saddle girth and rubbed the animal down. Once the fire cracked low, Nella unwrapped the last of the salt pork and laid slices in the skillet. The smell curled up into the trees. "You ever been married?" she asked, eyes on the pan. "No," Damon said, sitting on a flat rock nearby. "You?" "No," she said. "Almost once." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. When the pork was ready, she passed him a slice on the edge of her knife. He took it, careful not to brush her fingers. "I've been trying to remember what kindness feels like," she said after a long while. "Turns out it's quiet." "Like this." Damon chewed slowly, watching the firelight catch the curve of her cheek. "It's not supposed to be loud," he said. "The good parts." She looked at him then, long and steady. "I didn't think I'd feel safe again. You are now." She nodded once, then leaned back on her hands, eyes lifting to the darkening sky. Damon sat beside her but didn't touch her. The nearness was enough. When the stars came out, Nella curled up close to Hobble, who had decided her skirts were the best place in the world. Damon stayed awake a little longer, watching the fire die down, listening to the river move like it had for 1,000 years. He didn't know what she'd been before the road broke her wagon and those men found her. But he knew what she was now: sharp, unbent, and quiet in her strength. And he knew one other thing, as sure as anything had ever settled in his bones. He wasn't riding to Sweetwater alone anymore. They reached Sweetwater by late afternoon on the second day. The town crouched low under the wide sky, buildings sun-bleached and weather-worn, the main street quiet except for the occasional creak of a sign on rusted chains. Damon guided the horse south of the livery yard, where cottonwoods lined the edge of his land, their leaves shivering in the wind like they'd been waiting for someone. Nella dismounted without help, her boots hitting the earth like she meant to stay. She didn't ask questions, just looked at the house, single-story, rough-hewn logs, a porch that leaned slightly east and then past it, toward the fenced garden choked with weeds. "I'll clear that before winter," Damon said, watching her take it in. "I can do most of it," she answered, brushing hair from her face. "You've got a good stretch of land here. Is that a well?" He nodded. "Water's clean, cold too." She stepped toward it, eyes scanning the pump handle and trough, then turned back toward him. "You build the place, with my brother." Before he passed. She didn't ask how, and he didn't tell. Instead, they turned toward the house. Damon pushed the door open and let her go in first. Inside, the air was cool and still. A wood stove stood in the corner, the iron black from use. There was a single bed, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with jars of dried beans and sacks of flour. The walls were bare. "I'll sleep on the floor," Damon said, setting the saddlebags down. "You don't have to," she said, but not like she was offering. More like she was acknowledging something. He nodded once and moved to the stove, testing the flue. That evening, she boiled beans and wild onion in a dented pot while he split wood out back. Hobble wandered between the porch and the fence line, chewing everything he shouldn't. When they sat to eat, Damon reached for the salt, and Nella passed him the tin without needing to be asked. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked, breaking a piece of bread in half. "No." "Why not?" He looked at her. "Everything I've got is planted here." She chewed quietly, then set her spoon down. "I used to dream about San Francisco or maybe Galveston, somewhere with ocean." "Ever seen it?" "No," she said. "But I used to draw it from books, waves breaking like thunder. Ships like bones on the water." Damon pictured it, but it didn't stir anything in him. "You still draw?" She shook her head. "Not since the fire." His brow lifted, but he didn't ask. She didn't offer more. Later, while she washed the pot outside, Damon took a blanket from the chest and laid it near the stove. He set it up with care, one corner folded, extra wool stuffed along the edge where the floor dipped. When she came back in, her hands cold from the pump, she stopped beside him and looked down at it. "I'll be early to rise," he said. She nodded, then stepped around him, pulled off her boots, and sat on the bed. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do tomorrow," she said softly. "You don't have to do anything yet," he answered without looking at her. "I want to," she said. "I want to earn my place." He was quiet a moment. "You already have." She didn't reply, but a few minutes later she unbraided her hair and lay down without turning away. Damon banked the fire and stretched out on the blanket. The floor was hard, but it was warm, and the room had the quiet of something new starting. Before he let sleep take him, he whispered into the dark, "You're safe here." He hadn't meant for her to hear, but she did. "I know," she said. And for the first time since he'd buried his brother and closed off the softer parts of his life, Damon felt something gentle take root in the silence between two people. Not rescue, not debt, something steadier, something beginning. The first frost came early that year, curling silver along the porch rail and tightening the earth beneath Damon's boots. He rose before the light, as he always did, but now there was a second pair of footsteps behind him. Nella didn't ask what needed doing. She just pulled on her shawl and followed, sleeves pushed back, hair tied with a narrow strip of muslin. By mid-morning, she was on her knees in the garden, fingers digging through cold soil, pulling spent roots and turning the beds for winter. Damon worked the fence line with a hammer and spool of wire, glancing over now and then to see her shoulders square to the wind, unbothered by the chill. Hobble nosed through the leaves nearby, content to chew whatever he pleased. When he came in for water, she was standing at the sink washing grit from her hands. Her eyes flicked toward the door. "That shed's near falling down," she said. "I saw the roof dip when the wind hit it." "I know," Damon answered, wiping his palms on a rag. "You want help patching it?" He leaned against the frame. "You ever swung a mallet?" "No," she said. "But I've carried logs, drove nails, and made a meal stretch 5 days. I'll figure it out." He nodded once and stepped aside to let her pass. Out back, he pulled a tarp off the lumber pile and began laying out planks. She joined him, tying her skirt up past her knees with a length of twine. Neither of them spoke as they worked, but the rhythm came easy measure, lift, hold, brace. By the time the sun touched the far hills, the roof no longer sagged. Nella sat on the edge of the porch afterward, tugging splinters from her palm with the tip of a pin. Damon handed her a strip of linen and she wrapped it without flinching. "You always live this quiet?" she asked. "Quieter," he said, "before." She looked out over the dry grass, her voice low. "I used to talk to myself so I wouldn't forget how my voice sounded." He sat beside her, arms resting on his knees. "You don't have to do that anymore." They didn't speak again until the fire was lit. She made a stew from the last of the beans and a smoked bone Damon brought in from the smokehouse. When they sat, she reached for both bowls without a word, setting his in front of him like she'd done it 100 times. "I was thinking," she said, "if I can find a few hens, we could pen them near the back wall. There's enough scrap to build a coop." He looked up. "You plan on staying long enough to see eggs?" Her brow lifted slightly. "That a problem?" "No," he said, "it's not." The fire crackled between them. Damon rubbed his thumb along the rim of his bowl, then set it down. "You ever miss speaking soft?" he asked. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Words that aren't just about weather or work. Things that got edges worn round from being said often." She considered that. "I think I stopped trusting words when no one stayed long enough to keep them." Damon nodded. "I don't say things unless I mean to stay." Her gaze didn't leave his. "Then say something soft." He reached across the table slowly and placed his hand over hers. The warmth between them was steady, not rushed. "You're not alone anymore." She turned her hand beneath his, fingers threading together like they'd always known how. Outside, Hobble bleated once and bedded down beneath the porch, the straw rustling softly. Damon didn't pull his hand away. Neither did she. The first snow came with little warning, just a hush in the wind and the scent of ice in the air. Damon was mending the last gate hinge when it began to fall, soft flakes drifting down over the pasture like ash. Nella stood at the edge of the porch, her arms crossed over her shawl, watching the land soften under white. He looked up as she stepped off the porch and came toward him, her boots leaving shallow prints behind. "You ever trap rabbits?" she asked, brushing snow from the fence rail. He straightened slowly, nodding. "There's snare wire in the back shed." "Why?" "I saw tracks behind the well. We could stretch the stew further if we catch one." He handed her the hammer. "Show me where." She led him around the north side of the house, where the snow had gathered in small drifts against the base of the fence. Kneeling, she pointed to a faint trail of prints leading into the scrub. Damon crouched beside her, brushing aside snow with his glove. "You've done this before," he said, glancing at her. "My father taught me when I was young. We didn't always have coin for bullets." He nodded, unrolling the spool of snare wire. As she shaped a loop, he watched the way her brow creased in concentration, how her fingers moved with quiet certainty. When she finished, she looked up at him. "You want to set the next one?" He took the wire from her hand, their gloves brushing. "Only if you promise not to laugh if I do it wrong." "I'll think about it," she said, straightening with a smile that was new, unhurried, unguarded. Snow deepened through the afternoon, blanketing the yard and muting the world. Inside, The air smelled of spruce resin and heat from the stove. Damon added more wood while Nella hung her wet shawl near the hearth. Hobble had taken to sleeping beneath the table, and now he dozed with his chin on his hooves, warm and utterly useless. As she ladled hot broth into 2 bowls, Nella tilted her head toward the window. "You think the traps'll catch anything?" "They might," Damon said, accepting his bowl. "But I'd be all right if they didn't." She sat across from him, folding her hands around the tin cup. "Why?" He looked at her a long moment. "Because this day, right here, it's already more than I thought I'd have again." She went still, but not in fear. "I don't know what I thought would happen after you cut me loose. Maybe I'd move on, vanish somewhere new." "You still can," he said, though the words came slow. "I don't want to," she answered. The fire popped and snow tapped gently against the windows. Damon reached for her hand across the table. She didn't hesitate. Their fingers met and stayed, resting between the bowls and the steam. Later that night, she stood near the stove brushing her hair, and he stepped behind her, lifting the kettle to add more water. She didn't move away. "I never thought I'd feel at home again," she said. "You are," he answered, voice quiet. "And not because of the roof or the walls." She turned, her hair loose over one shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just asking if you'd stay, not because you need to." "Because you want to." She stepped forward and her palm came to rest against his chest. "I already have." Damon leaned down, and when their lips met, it wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was steady, like the ground beneath them, like winter mornings and the promise of spring. They shared the bed that night, not from necessity, but because it was time. The warmth between them was quiet and whole, not rushed, not fragile. Their hands moved with care, like reading something sacred. When they finally slept, her head rested over the place where his heart beat slow and sure. The snow stayed for 3 more days. They checked the traps together, found 2 rabbits, and shared the work of dressing, curing, and cooking. Nella began sewing a quilt from scraps Damon had kept in a chest since before his brother passed. She stitched in silence, but not the kind that kept people apart. He built her a second chair for the porch. She didn't ask for it, he simply made it one morning and left it beside hers. That evening she sat in it with a basket of mending and said, "You got the angle just right." "I paid attention," he said. Come spring, she planted herbs in the cleared beds behind the house. He carved her a small box to keep seeds in. She began drawing again, using charcoal and the rough paper he found in town. One morning, she showed him a sketch of the goat curled under the porch, and he laughed louder than he had in years. They married under the cottonwoods behind the house, with a neighbor couple and their boys as witnesses. She wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin, and lace she'd recovered from the bottom of her trunk. Damon shaved for the first time in weeks, and afterward she rubbed her thumb along his jaw and said, "You look younger, but I like the lines." He kissed her under the boughs, with the wind in the trees and Hobble bleeding somewhere behind the fence. Years passed, and the house became theirs in every way. She filled the shelves with jars of dried herbs, and he built a second room for her drawings and the cradle they'd need by next winter. He never asked her to forget what came before. She never asked him to explain the weight he still carried from his brother's death. They simply made space for each other's quiet, and in that space something whole grew. They aged side by side. Not soft, but steady. Not perfect, but real. And when the wind moved through the cottonwoods, Damon sometimes took her hand on the porch and said, "You were never a stranger." And Nella would answer, "No, I just hadn't found the right place yet." And that place always was with him.